Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Ewald, and I am the creator and host of the Stormy Petrel Times podcast. For this amazing season and first episode for spring 2024, I welcome the first Muslim state house representative elected in Georgia and 30 years old Representative Ruwa Romman.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And one really quick note, I'm actually the first Muslim woman. I actually came in with a really, really great colleague named Farouk Mughal, who's also Muslim. So this year we had a really phenomenal three-person freshman class of Muslim legislators, one in the Senate as well.
Yay! That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes. And just to kickstart all of this is that you are invited to speak about your experiences. You're also an alumnus from Oglethorpe University. Is that correct?
Correct. I am. I'm a Petrel. Actually, PD capital earlier this week.
Yes, we saw on social media and stuff like that. And not only that as well, you were also at some point student body president at Oglethorpe University, but we want to dive directly into the questions, starting with number one. Please describe your political journey. Like, why did you get involved in local politics?
Yeah, so amazingly enough, it was actually at Oglethorpe that I started this journey. Michelle Nunn and Jason Carter were running for governor and Senate in Georgia. And at the time, they had a really, really great outreach team. They came to Oglethorpe and they talked to students about, hey, do you want to get involved? I had never been politically involved before. I didn't know what that even looked like. But it was through their campaign that I learned how to canvass, meaning knocking doors, and how to phone bank. In fact, back then, unlike now, if you wanted to phone bank, you had to physically go down there and like get sheets of paper. And even when you were door knocking, it was on sheets of paper. So it was still very analog at the time. But that really sparked an interest for me because one thing I noticed during that experience was that there was little targeted outreach to the Muslim and Arab community in particular. I'm actually the first Palestinian elected in the state of Georgia. And so I was just very acutely aware of that. And I decided to work for organizations like the Georgia Muslim Voter Project and like Care Georgia, focused on, mobilizing the Muslim community and protecting the Muslim community, because this was also during the Trump administration. And my journey had stayed mostly on the what's called nonprofit C3 side, meaning it wasn't really political, it was more educational. But then after I got my master's and came back, I really sort of dove really, really deeply into partisan politics. I was sort of part of a team that helped train volunteers for the Asaf Warnock campaign. Well, not directly for them. It was called the Georgia Volunteer Hub. It was something that we made on our own. And then we sent those volunteers to different organizations, including the Campaign to Volunteer. We trained thousands of volunteers. It was really incredible. And then from that experience, I just stayed really politically active. I really cared about my community. I was kind of doing my own job full time. And this was my sort of side type situation at that point in 2020, 2021. And I was in the middle of a career transition when I applied for that job. The people I was applying with had looked up my address and realized, oh, I'm in a brand new district. My district had just gotten redrawn. And it turned out I was in a new open blue seat. And I was not really interested, to be honest with you. Just it's one thing to work in politics. It's something different to be the person whose name is on the flyers and the person whose name is on everything. And that's just not something that was interesting to me. But because I had helped a friend out with a training at Georgia Muslim Voter Project around recruiting candidates, I spoke at the time to an AJC reporter, and she had started her article with Ruwa Romman's contemplating a run for office, which I wasn't, but it was a fair assumption because she met me at a training for candidates. And so, my community got so excited. And 15 days later, we launched a very unexpected campaign for State House.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Because oftentimes I've heard stories too about how people did not expect themselves to even be running. And I feel like those are the best candidates. So what are some leadership characteristics, and what does being a leader mean to you? What are some characteristics that you look for in a leader, but what does it mean to be a leader to you?
I think a leader is somebody who is willing to be honest when it's really difficult and is willing to do the right thing when it's really difficult. I think a lot of times in politics, we have a tendency to convince ourselves of positions that are politically expedient for the sake of maintaining power. And to me personally, I actually think that there is a way to have consistent values and honest values as long as you prepare well for them and message them out to people. Because people, as long as you explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it, for the most part, will actually either, they might disagree with you, but they won't hate you for it. And I think sometimes we do our constituents a disservice by, not telling them what's going on and keeping them informed. And so for me, a leader really is somebody who is willing to make those hard decisions, willing to stand up for those hard decisions, but also willing to pull people up with them. I've seen so many times where people kind of view opportunity as a finite resource. And so they think that the only way for them to move up in life is to step on other people. I actually think it's the total opposite. I firmly believe that a good leader is someone who has what I call broad followership, meaning people who trust them and reach out to them for mentorship and advice and support. Now, obviously, as I adjust to my role, that doesn't always mean I have a lot of time for that. But I do know that on my campaigns, for example, we try really hard to train everybody that comes through and try to find them a skill set and a place to have them work. Because I do believe in building up that next sort of set of campaign people and elected officials and leaders and things like that.
Wow, well said. I love that. That's so true. And I feel like that young people, especially college students who are holding leadership roles and like aspire and want to do things in leadership roles, definitely need to take your word on that. Because you definitely, in my opinion, are a really good leader that I wish there were more of in politics. But unfortunately, we have to have it one person at a time to change the course of some people in office who are there for the opposite reasons.
It takes all of us.
Yeah. And like, as an Oglethorpe University alumnus, like how has our Oglethorpe University and like your experience when you were serving as student body president help you prepare for a future in leadership?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I always tell people that clubs are not a waste of time. I think sometimes people think, okay, I'm going to college to get a degree and leave. But the beautiful thing about clubs and organizations on campus is they give you an opportunity to practice being a leader in a less sort of stressful, high stakes environment. And I want to be clear, you are making a difference on campus. It's not like just because the stakes are a little bit lower, it means it's any less important. It just simply means that it's kind of like a video game. You gain skill sets and you only level up once you've gotten to a certain level of expertise or health or whatever. And I feel like student organizations is that sort of leveling up in terms of leadership because for me personally, I was not part of student government. I had run my freshman year and I didn't get a position. And so I was also involved in Coexist, Oglethorpe, and other organizations. And so for me, it was just a matter of how can I give back to campus? And a lot of people wear a lot of hats at Oglethorpe. It was just, there was so much that we were doing. But I remember clearly there was a moment where there was a lot of tension on campus because there was a program called EF, Education First, that was invited to campus to bring students who were interested in learning English to be on campus. The problem was the way the program was embedded in the university was really, really disruptive. There was, the dining hall can only accommodate so many people. So nobody ever staggered class schedules. They didn't have the same honor code, things like that. And so while some people felt like the students were just simply uncomfortable with international students, at the time, 30% of the student body was international exchange students. And so it wasn't that they were students from another country. It was honestly to me, it was one of those moments where I thought, okay, everyone's really, really mad about this. But honestly, a big part of it was a logistical issue. Can we cap the number of students that come to the university from that program? Can we ensure that they have to, go by the same honor and student code? Can we, stagger dining hall hours? I mean, they were genuinely easy fixes. And it was crazy to me that nobody was talking about that. And so I'd organized a letter with some of those suggestions, and we didn't even call it it wasn't even meant to be like a petition or any kind of, antagonistic effort against the administration. It came from a place of I really want to problem solve. But it was really fascinating because we got, I think, like over 100 signatures. Students were really into the idea of it. And when student government elections came along, my friends actually started a campaign and nominated me and ran my campaign for student government, which was really sweet and really unexpected. And so that's how I ended up becoming student body president. But that experience explicitly and specifically was how I learned about the power and importance of, frankly, grassroots organizing. And why I always tell people, and to your point, this is why the best people who end up in office are the ones who had no intention of running for office. And it's because you really cannot plan, like, becoming an elected official isn't something that you can plan for your 5-year plan, right? Because one, you if you're not in office, you have little say and control over how districts are drawn and redrawn. And then on top of that, there's usually incumbents, depending on how popular they are, they might not be beatable. Or they might be beatable, but like you might be taking away an opportunity for a district of a representative who does a really good job of bringing like needed money into the district. And so for me personally, had you told me that I was going to be running for office in 2022, I would have genuinely laughed in your face, because my intention was to run a marathon, help elect Democrats up and down the ticket in Georgia in 2022. Like, that was my plan. I had no plan on running for office. But then all of a sudden my district got redrawn. And then on top of that, the person who was in that seat decided to get a different office, and then, or pursue a different office. And then from there, it was like my community got really into it. So there are some things you can do to prepare yourself, such as organizing your community and things like that. But the idea that you can just plan a run, based on a long-term timeline just isn't there. And I kind of felt the same way about student government, which was, I tried a race, it didn't work out. I actually ended up doing things that I found a lot more joy and like purpose in at the time, just from where I was in life. And then next thing I know, I was being elected student body president.
Oh, yeah, that's truly wonderful. Yeah. And just like in general, like, can you tell me anything about how to plan for the future you want? Like for young people and stuff like that, some may be interested in becoming lawyers, doctors, other people were interested in becoming professional athletes. Like, how do you, even though sometimes the best things happen unexpectedly, like, what would you say to people who want to try to plan or set out the basis for the future they want?
Yeah, and I totally get that. Like, I was somebody like that. For me, my original plan was to go to law school. And so what I tell people is pursue the skills that you need for an opportunity. So for example, if you're interested in going to law school but you're not sure, make sure you're taking classes that will prepare you for law school. So take some of those, logic classes, take some of those philosophy classes, so that when you are studying for your LSATs, you're having a slightly easier time than your peers. And so whatever it is that you want to do, get the skill sets and keep pursuing it. But the reason I always say that you also need to be flexible, because you might be so focused on a goal that you miss out on incredible opportunities that you never would have dreamed of. That was how it was for me, right? I remember when I was younger, I was going to go to law school, and then I was going to work for the State Department, and then I wanted to become Secretary of State. And honestly, there's literally nothing less that I want to do than ever work for the federal government or be a part of the federal government. Because as I grew and as I learned and as I organized, I just found that my heart was in local work. My heart was in state work. My heart was in the community that I lived in. And so, I really do firmly believe in this idea. I think it comes from my international baccalaureate background. So for those who are familiar, the IB program, where it was like act locally, but think globally. And for me, I really did firmly believe that the best way to fix foreign policy was to first fix our issues here in the United States. And I still do believe that. I'm a Palestinian. The past 4 months have been beyond painful for me. But at the same time, I also recognize that I have a role to play here. And that is, one, educating those around me, but two, continuing to improve how people are politically active, so that in the future, we can ensure that the policies that are being carried out in our name reflect our values.
That's amazing. Yes, 100% agree. And just like when you talk about local and federal politics and stuff like that, I think that a lot of times the question occurs from both right and left. Is like, I think that we can definitely agree that, a lot of times Democrats understand representation in politics, but for those who may be confused or stuff like that, like, why is it important to have representation in locally or federally or both?
So I'm of the opinion that somebody just looking like us or coming from the same community is actually not enough. I think that the people who represent us, from, being minorities and stuff, have to also represent our values. And so, for me personally, that's like such a big responsibility. And I also think it comes with an added level of difficulty because you're representing your constituents and you're representing a broader constituency. And so it's really important that those that represent us truly represent us in every way, because there are experiences that I have that other people have never had before and could never even consider. So in the case of Georgia, as an example, of course, people want to score political points, but, I actually had to have a conversation with one of my colleagues that was like, hey, what you say can literally incite violence against my community. And that was something they'd never thought of before. And so things like, it can be stuff like that is so specific to like our identity and who we are, but then it can also be, socioeconomic representation. Not everybody comes from, a trust fund or a wealthy family or even a middle-class family. What does it mean to live in poverty? What does it mean to be hungry? What does it mean to, how is it disruptive to a student when they don't have enough food to eat, right? Like those kinds of, there's just so many different ways to be representative of people. But at the same time, you have to ensure that you hold on to who you are, because if you don't, then you're just another voice like everyone else. And there's no, frankly, no reason for you to be there.
Well said, for real. And I think that it's very important for our listeners to remember that you're gonna have values with purpose, and there are gonna be so many times in leadership roles that people try to question your values or make you appear to be fake or not and stuff like that. But it's just how do you deal with that? How do you deal with naysayers? How do you deal with people who try to misconstrue your intentions and make you look like something you're not?
I've noticed that among my colleagues, a lot of them get so hung up on the naysayers, and even I, for a little bit, kind of started to get into it. But the thing that kept coming up for me over and over and over again is that I kind of had to force myself to go, okay, these people are being negative, but then look at all this other positive affirmation. And when I started to actually remind myself to look for the positive affirmation, it actually made me realize there's so much more of it, and we quantified it. So, I remember with the Cop City stuff, I was the only state level person for a while who was very publicly against the center. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm probably going to get some hate for this. And, of course we did, there were some comments and things like that, but overwhelmingly, even the people who supported the facility, at least understood my point. And some of them actually changed their mind. And there are, to be very clear, there are people involved in this project at very high levels who genuinely believe I'm doing this for attention. But I came into this with the idea that I want to bring public service back into politics. And this project in particular was everything I hated about politics. It was backroom deals. It was people are showing up and doing their civic duty, but being completely ignored. It was environmental issues and forests being destroyed. It was lack of transparency with the Atlanta Police Foundation, which we have no insight into. It was first $30 million, then $90 million of tax funds. It was everything I hate about politics. And so there are going to be people that think I'm doing it for attention. That's fine. I mean, they can keep saying that. And if they're that concerned about my advocacy, then maybe they should reconsider their position, or they can keep saying I'm doing it for attention. But if that's the case, then why aren't they ignoring me? If I have no point and the only reason I'm doing this is for attention, why are they paying enough attention to tell other people about it?
That's very smart thinking. That's a good way to look at it. And just in general, to kind of wrap up all the things that you touched on, it's just do you have any last remarks for the Petrel community or people or young people alike?
Yeah. I mean, this is something I think it's really easy to be jaded by the quote unquote system, by the government, by all of these ubiquitous terms. But the thing is, the more you break it down by specifics, the more you're able to realize how much impact you can have. There in Virginia, for example, a couple of years ago, maybe it was actually 2017, their state house came down to one race, and that race ended up a tie, and they pulled the name out of a bowl, and that's how they decided which party ended up controlling the chamber for 2 more years. And so what I remind people is that, can you control everything the president or Congress does? No, those are much bigger offices. They represent a lot more people. Your vote is diluted, among a million, or, in the case of Georgia, 17 million, or in the case of the United States, 300 million people. But at a state and local level in particular, we are allowing decisions to be made about us that we have so much control over. And so what I remind people is that the more you get involved on a local level, one, the more change you can have, the more change you can make around you. But two, you're then building infrastructure and pipelines of leaders that share your values so that in the future, when that opening comes up for Congress, the people running for it, as an example, share your values. A lot of times, yes, every once in a while you have some like random person run for Congress or Senate or president who like kind of comes out of nowhere. Granted, not really president, but actually, yeah, president. But, at the same time, most of the time, those leaders on a federal level come from a local level pipeline. And so, what are we doing to, build and train and support the candidates who share our values so that in the future, when those opportunities come, they're ready for it? I want to be clear, I have zero interest in that, just like I had zero interest for this job. And I actually do really enjoy state level work. But, I also know that some of my colleagues might have those aspirations. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what our values are and what those look like and how can we get them the support they need to keep those values, because that's the other thing. Like I tell people there's what I call the influence wheel, right? You raise awareness by sharing on social media, you tell people about it, but then you go on to elect them or get them in office about it. But there's also an accountability piece that people forget. How do we hold people accountable? If they're not doing what we ask them to, are we able to get them out of office and replace them? And that's a really, really crucial part to ensuring that the people we elect actually maintain the values that we elected them for.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ruwa. And this is our amazing Georgia State Representative, Ruwa Romman. Don't forget to follow her on her socials, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, and much more. And don't also forget to follow the Stormy Times, the Petrel Times podcast on Instagram as well. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and much more. Thank you, everyone. Your host, Ashley Ewald.
Thanks all.